Appreciate everybody and your time for being here today. I'm Corbb O'Connor, right now an independent accessibility consultant, previously with SiteImprove, with US Bank and a few others. And one of the things that I have consistently heard is that in each of our roles across an organization, at some point, we are going to have to make a decision about procuring software or hardware. And a lot of times what we end up with in the market is that there is not a great accessible solution. So when I talk about procuring inaccessible solutions, I truly mean, how do we procure an inaccessible solution, but make it so that everyone can use it? Like, if there were to be a secondary hashtag to this conference, it would be controversial statement. And so we've heard a lot of those. And so mine is, you're gonna buy inaccessible tech, even if in the best of intentions. So how do we do it well? I'm going to drop a link in the chat. I'm also putting up a QR code with the slides for today's presentation. It's an iCloud drive and seems to be a relatively accessible download link. So bit.ly/webaim22corbb, C-O-R-B-B. And I'll leave that up for just an extra couple seconds here so everyone's got time to grab their smartphones or type in that URL that need it. Again, it's bit.ly/webaim22corbb, all lowercase. I had a bit of a crisis this morning, wondering if I should have camel cased it or what. Maybe I should just make a second link, but regardless, all lowercase for today. So let's make sure then that we talk about this technical term for software that doesn't work. Software that's not accessible. It's very technical. I hope you're ready for it. And the word is broken. The idea here is that we need to treat accessibility defects, bugs, and problems with software and hardware like we would any functional issue. Now, that's not to say that I'm not talking about the quality assurance testing process. I think we heard yesterday from Sherry about the importance of not overlaying those two processes one-to-one, but overlapping just a little bit, very careful about it. What I'm talking about is making sure that we think of these issues when we are the purchaser or the user of software that doesn't work with or without a screen reader, with a mouse, with a keyboard, with voice dictation, or even just looking at it from a cognitive perspective, that we treat all of those issues with equal weight. Now, I also want to point out, Lainey posted yesterday, and I'll get to kind of this idea of this Procure Access initiative, but she summed it up really well on LinkedIn. I've got a post of hers here that she says we can sum all of this up in 10 words. Don't buy or sell tech that disabled people can't use. Brilliant. So what I'm not talking about today is the Procure Access initiative. I think it's a great project. It's run by Disability In. And the idea with that is as an organization, how can you make your procurement more accessible? What policies, what procedures do you need? What buy-in do you need from different levels of the organization to make your procurement systems accessible? What I'd like to focus on today is, what are the things that you, yes, you, yourself, I'm told in public radio, the whole listeners like you, a lot of people think it doesn't apply to them. This applies to you, that you can do at any level of your organization to influence the purchasing of accessible software and hardware. So there are 6 things that we're going to cover today that are part of how we can create a process of accessible purchasing. So we're going to start by asking the community. We're going to talk about the VPAT, the VPAT, the voluntary product accessibility template that hopefully your software and hardware providers have produced. The third topic, pricing, remediation, so fixing the things that we find, the usage alternatives, and how we might be able to do it ourselves, DIY of accessible purchasing. Those are the 6 areas we're going to cover. And I welcome you to drop your questions into the Q&A as we go along, and I'm eager to answer those. I'll tell our couple of hosts as well, feel free to interrupt me along the way. If we've got a question that's pretty timely, feel free to interrupt me. I love questions along the way. So first, the first part of this hexagonal way that we're organizing today, is about asking the community. It starts real simple. Social media with the hashtag A11Y saying, hey, does anybody out there have a great project management tool? Any great time tracking tools? Have you bought a great photocopier recently? I think people are still using photocopiers at some level, right? Have we found a great solution for our organization's going to be procuring transportation? Is there anything we should know? What has worked well for you? I'm always amazed at the kindness and the generosity of the accessibility community in sharing what we've come to find. And I love it when there's a company that has accidentally made a very accessible solution that gets a lot of praise on social media and a lot of customers from us as loyal folks with disabilities who are saying that we should make sure to go out and introduce that. I failed to introduce myself as a person with a disability, and I failed to introduce myself entirely. I use he, him pronouns. I'm blind and I'm Irish descent, wearing a blue suit and a pin that is of a pineapple for hospitality, the colonial symbol of welcome. Okay, back on track. Asking the community about accessibility. It's also important that we ask our employees and just people you know who've identified as having disabilities. I think a lot of times what I've observed in organizations of a medium and large size is that we go out and team is procuring, marketing is going out and procuring a solution, legal's going out and procuring a solution. And we think, well, we don't have anything to announce yet. We don't want to ask everybody, and we don't want to be democratic about it, because ultimately we're going to have to make a decision. But I think the benefit of involving people early is because we, at any level, as folks with disabilities, have interacted with folks of all kinds of different levels of organizations, and we know what does a great job. We may know accessibility professionals working for, let's say, a company that produces, legal software that we know has really made a great commitment to accessibility. And given a couple of options, wouldn't it be great if we went with the company where we have a direct line with that accessibility team? There's also, and I mentioned this Procure Access initiative, and we'll get to that a little bit later on from Disability In, but there's a statement that now, and just news breaking yesterday, that there are several organizations who've signed on to that statement that commit to procuring and selling accessible software. And right now that list has about a dozen companies on it, some great names, some names you'll recognize. And I encourage you to check that list and see if maybe one of those companies is something that can provide the solution that you need. So that's asking the community. Let's move on to the most fun part of this for some of us, and the part that is the most confusing for others, and that's the voluntary product accessibility template. Hopefully, this is linked on your vendor's website, at the bottom, privacy policy, terms of use, about us, accessibility. Hopefully that page is listing their accessibility statements. So before you read the document, because those documents are confusing, what I would say is go into the tool you're thinking about purchasing, or go stand in front of it and say, can I operate this with my keyboard? Most of them have a 5, 10, 30-day trial. Sign up and just start poking around, as you probably are already doing. And just set your mouse aside. For those who are new to accessibility testing, I truly mean putting your mouse aside. It's fun to watch people try and do keyboard testing and grab their mouse and not even realize they're holding a mouse anymore. Put it across the room and just navigate through that site with your keyboard. And if you're on a laptop, plug in a USB keyboard, set it far away, and do your testing that way. Can I do anything with this tool with only a keyboard? It should be pretty obvious at what level keyboard users are supported. There are great automated tools. Maybe the tertiary hashtag for this conference is all about the wave engine or the automated testing. And it's not going to catch everything. But if I pull up a new tool that I'm thinking of procuring, I'm on the dashboard page, or I'm on one of the main pages of that tool, and I run a wave, a site improve, a DQ, level access extension on it, and I come up with hundreds of errors, that tells me something. If it comes back and tells me there's 10, 20 errors on a page that has hundreds and hundreds of elements, that tells me something very different. It gives you a sense of, okay, what kinds of things should I expect to see in the voluntary product accessibility template. If I find that I can't navigate this thing with a keyboard and my automated errors have come back pretty high, and I see a voluntary product accessibility template that says we're a pretty accessible tool, something's not adding up here, and it's worth investigating. And then, of course, the ultimate testing question, to run or not to run a screen reader, right? I think that these first two bullets, the keyboard testing and the automated tools, are going to give you the information that you need. But it certainly doesn't hurt if you are experienced with a screen reader to run it and see what you can find. If you're not super experienced, maybe spend a few minutes, but really, again, controversial statement warning, I don't think it's necessary at this stage. I think it's an important thing to do. And if you're the purchaser of that technology or the person who sits next to you is, maybe not too problematic to ask, right? If there's free time and somebody's involved in that process, sure, let's take a look at it. My colleague and I, a year or so ago, sat down and looked at all kinds of project management tools. And we would just set up quick Zoom meetings. We would both create accounts and we would just poke around. And that was helpful for me, right? As a screen reader user trying to figure out an inaccessible tool or even a new tool. Okay, is this a me thing or is this a everybody thing? Is this confusing to you as a sighted person and confusing to me? Okay, great, we know we need some training. Makes perfect sense from a visual perspective, super confusing, right? To me as a screen reader user. That way, what it allowed me to do is in about 20 minutes, I could look at the core functionality of a project management tool. And we could narrow down our list pretty quickly of those that were, oh, wow, there's interesting accessibility things built in here, or, oh boy, this is wildly not going to work. But it gave us a chance for my colleague even to help me kind of get through, maybe the first page is problematic, maybe the second page is great, right? If I can't get there, my colleague is there to say, oh, can we find this on the screen and click this, go in here. Okay, now how is this page? And it gives us a little bit more efficiency in our testing. So part 2 of the voluntary product accessibility template process is about terminology. I could, and have a whole presentation about how to read and write these template documents. The terminology is the most important part. And the first one is that these template documents come from Section 508 of the Rehab Act of 1973. Basically, the federal government wants to procure accessible technology, so they've come up with this standard document that we can all use to evaluate two products side by side, how accessible is one compared to another. That's the idea. So to do that, we have a few terms to know. And the main one that you're looking for is supports, right? So if I say that there are text-based alternatives to images, and I say my tool supports it, great. That tells me that there's at least one method of using my tool or my product that meets this criterion, for example, text alternative to an image, without known problems, or there's an accessible way to achieve the outcome. So maybe I have devised a second way of somebody to do this. Maybe there's 4 ways to create a new project, 4 ways to create a new time entry. One of those is going to be usable by folks with disabilities. I'm not saying that's great. I'm not saying that's the ideal. I'm saying that's what this means when it says supports. The most dangerous one is supports with exceptions. So there's some parts of this product fail to meet the criterion. Fail is the important word here. It doesn't mean, I think sometimes we read supports with exceptions and we go, oh, okay, so it's like halfway, it's okay, it's decent. No, there's the word fail in there. This is one of the things that's beneficial about WCAG, right? You either pass or fail a criterion for that page of your product or that screen of your product. One problem, you fail. Well, yeah, it's not the greatest if we're on the side of trying to show that we're a very compliant product, but from a user, that gives me an equal footing to say, I don't know how important each of these things are on the page. You don't get to determine that for me. If one of them's not right, it fails. Does not support, right? Another, what's going on here? The majority of the product fails to meet the criteria. So if we see does not support, we know that there's been less effort put into this part of the product than we would expect. It also tells us that our vendor is incredibly honest at this moment in time. And it gives us a chance to start a conversation. The final one is not applicable. I've seen this on too many places. It's really supposed to only be used for AAA criterion but it's used, or for example, if you have a product, let's say it's a time tracking tool, you don't have any videos, you can say it's not applicable. But there are a lot of criteria that vendors will mark as not applicable that really are applicable. They've just determined that, well, yeah, we have help center videos, but no, you don't really need them. Well, no, that's not the same. That would mean that you do not support if you don't have captions or transcripts. That doesn't mean you get to decide what's applicable to me as a user. So these are the 4 big things to watch for as you're reading that document. And then there's not evaluated. This is the only applicable to level AAA. And the idea being that you didn't, as you were creating this document, you didn't look against it. So not applicable, you might use throughout for things that truly you don't have to evaluate in your product. They don't exist, rather than you're choosing to say they don't apply. So let's talk finally our final part of the second part of this presentation, the tips for attentive reading of these documents. The first is to watch out, as I mentioned, for these exceptions. Why is there an exception here? It may be that as you dig into what that exception is, and hopefully that's detailed for you in the document, you may find that, well, that makes sense, or, oh, well, we're not using the tool for that today. Okay, but something to keep an eye on going forward. Just a reason to kind of call those out as you're reading through that document. Look at what the vendor claims is not applicable. We talked about that just a little bit here. Read the explanatory notes, especially at the beginning of the report. I was evaluating a product that we were going to be using as a company, and the idea was that you would be able to send and receive signed documents. And the VPAT that I first read, to be clear, many years ago, said that this was all about the signing part of this tool. Okay, great. But the note told me that the sending part was not something that was covered by this VPAT. The note told me that then when I did get a second VPAT, I said, but it still says this second screen is not covered by the VPAT. Both of those are the most important screen of a document, right? So if our product, if I'm only looking at what it's like for someone to sign the document, that's great. But what about somebody in my organization who needs to send the document? So watch out for those notes that will tell you what is covered, what methods were used, how we tested, that kind of thing. Ask about whether the vendor has multiple VPATs, right? So again, that, hey, maybe we have a product that's built into 3 parts and I've sent you one document that doesn't seem to cover these other 2. You might just ask right out of the gate, hey, do you have multiple for your product? Have you broken it into multiple documents? Perfectly fine to do. Just make sure that you realize what you're reading. And beware when a vendor claims to conform to level AAA. Possible, absolutely. Laudable, great thing to do. Highly likely that it was filled out by someone who didn't quite understand what some of those requirements were saying. Similarly, if you see that the vendor says that we are fully accessible, may be true, but something to double check. It's like the students that all magically get 100 on their final exams. Great, maybe they had a wonderful teacher. Maybe it was a terrible test. Or maybe something else was going on. Just raises the flag to think about. So that's VPATs. We'll talk now about remediation. So we're into our third bullet of how we will be looking at procurement and process. So ask to meet with the accessibility team for that vendor. This is not something that is necessarily an easily granted or often granted request. But the benefit is to say, hey, look, this is really important to us. We want to make sure to meet with your accessibility team. In the same way, though, that it would be perfectly normal for the 2 legal teams to come together. We could send documents back and forth, but sure, wouldn't it be nice if we all hopped in a meeting and all the lawyers got on the same literal page about what they wanted in the agreement? It works much faster. Well, the same with the accessibility team. I noticed that a lot of vendors are reluctant to do this because one will tell me, well, the accessibility team, they're really busy. They're not customer facing. That sounds to me like they probably are very busy on this large product, but at the same time, I think it's important that they know what the needs of users are. We've heard a lot at this conference over the last day about how important it is to involve people with disabilities. And so similarly, we want to involve people with disabilities who are going to be customers to make sure that what they need is available in this product. Generally, the accessibility teams love to meet with users. There's just sometimes a wall in the way, whether that's coming from a sales team or a legal risk team, but something that I found to be incredibly beneficial when we can. Might need to sign a non-disclosure agreement, no problem, happy to do that, but make sure that you're able to meet with that team. Also to understand their design and development process. Okay, we can't meet with your accessibility team. How about we meet with your designers and developers? Again, these people, especially user experience designers, love meeting with users. And the benefit there is to say, okay, so at what point does this team know about accessibility? What does the developer know? What does the designer know? How are we thinking about when we send over our comps or our designs? How are we making sure that those have some notes about what to expect for accessibility? Oh, they don't? It's another data point for you. And you may not find that you find the perfect vendor, but what you can do is start to evaluate kind of as a matrix, vendor A against vendor B against vendor C. They made it easy to meet with their accessibility team. These folks all their designers have been through a level of accessibility training. The documents they've sent us are accessible. Their developers knew what alternative text was. They knew how to use ARIA properly. Those are the kinds of things that can be really helpful. It's also important when we're talking about remediation, what are the timelines for the accessibility debt of this product? Every product has some accessibility debt in it. Just like financial debt, it's no fun to pay it off. It's only fun when it's done. And you're not getting a whole lot for doing it, except that you're not creating more problems later down the road for yourself. Well, what are the timelines? I had one vendor tell me last year, oh yes, we account for 1 point in each of our sprints for accessibility. And I said, well, what can you give me an example of what a 1 point story is? Oh, we added ARIA labels to our 6 main menu icons. Well, understandably, that's a point, but that's all you're going to do in this product that's really got hundreds of features and pieces of it that I'm looking to use that I know I can't use today, versus companies that say, well, yeah, we have a timeline that when we identify an accessibility blocker, it goes through this triage process and we generally can put it into a sprint within a few weeks. We're not asking them to tell us exactly where all their dirty laundry is and when they're planning to clean, fold, put away all that clothes, right? Or all of that bad accessibility problems. What we're looking for is to say, when something's pointed out to you, how responsive can you be to it? And that, again, that one-to-one connection when you find the accessibility problem. So who can I talk to on your accessibility team? I may have to start with a support ticket. That's fine, but I want to know that I'm going to get to somebody who understands accessibility throughout this product. I want to make sure, even better, if I've got a buddy who works for an organization, I can send them specific things I find and we can have a direct conversation. Hat tip to DocuSign, right? My colleague, friend is working at DocuSign, and I probably am a bit of a thorn in his side, because when I would find issues, I'd reach out to him and say, hey, your product is great. I love so many of these things. This latest update seems to have caused a bug. Can you look into it? And I could get a response back quickly of, thank you for letting us know, and he was never telling me more than he should, but he would give me at least some understanding that it was on the roadmap, that it was understood what the issue was, that it was understood the priority that caused. And we resolved a lot of issues that way that didn't need to go through a lot of bureaucracy. That made them a great partner, because we were able to have that connection and make that kind of change, not just for me, I am selfish, but also for all the other users with disabilities in my organization and in all of your organizations that are really doing some great work. And then finally, putting all of these things into the contract. So having an obligation that even just high level says, we're going to, and we, again, controversial statement, whether or not a company is ever going to be fully accessible and fully WCAG conformant, putting in the contract a date by which they will be, and having some teeth around what happens when that doesn't come to pass. That contractual obligation could be that within 30 days of being identified, of an accessibility issue being identified, you'll get a timeline for when it's going to be addressed. It could be that we expect to be fully conformant by this date. And it's something to continue to hold the organization to. I can tell you from personal experience, nothing got the product teams more attention than when a new sale was held up because somebody was putting into the contract language about the product. Even better when that's about accessibility. So about pricing, here comes the teeth, right? Money talks when it comes to pricing. If we can make sure that accessibility, and Mike and the panel that preceded this conversation, we're talking about that money is the thing that's going to drive business and drive innovation. So from a pricing perspective, saying, okay, vendor, we have understood that you're not fully accessible. That means that some portion of your tool is not usable by some portion of our team. Therefore, we're not paying for software that is, remember that word that is really technical, broken. We're not paying for broken software. Or yes, we'd still like to go through with this, but we're going to negotiate an initial discount with you. I was with an organization where we negotiated an 80% discount on an enterprise level tool used by every person in the organization. And we did that because we knew that it wasn't fully accessible. They knew it wasn't accessible, and they said all these things during the sales process. We want to partner. We want to be better. Thank you for telling us. These are all fantastic things. I'm glad they told us that they were interested. But money is what is going to keep everybody at the table. And then saying, we're not talking about discounts. Discounts are kind of questionable as to whether we'll do that on a recurring basis, but maybe it's a billing adjustment. Maybe you can come up with a better term. I invite you to throw that in the chat. What is a better term that you can position to a vendor to say, hey, I want to make sure that we get a discount, though we'll change the name, every year until your product is accessible. And let's look at what some of those are. Throw those into the chat. I would love to see your ideas about what kinds of terms we could use to encourage companies to continually make progress on their accessibility. Maybe we call it, it's an accessibility enhancement. Maybe we say that, if the product is more accessible next year, we will give more money, though if we're giving more, that's still not full price. Pro rates are great. A positive KPI, positive key performance indicator. I love the word KPI. Thank you, Pat Godfrey. And having an incentive. Absolutely, totally agree with you, Pamela, that we want to have incentives in place for them to do the right thing. And of course, at the end of this, you will need the willingness to walk away. None of these things that we have asked for from the vendor, meeting with the accessibility team, changing the agreement, negotiating discounts, none of these things is easy. And none of these things is likely to be met with a vendor saying, absolutely, let me do that for you right now. I was on a call and my colleague Anna was sending me Slack messages telling me about how I was causing our salesperson to sweat profusely, to be very unsure of it, all the visual signs that I wasn't seeing, that he was very uncomfortable. And I was trying to very, very hard to keep a straight face. But the point being, I knew I wasn't asking comfortable questions. That's what negotiation is all about. It's about getting to an end that we can all agree on, even if it's not going to be super pleasant throughout the way. And one of those things might be, hey, look, accessibility is important to us. We may choose a different vendor over this. And that for us, as I was doing these purchasing over the last few years, got a lot of attention. Again, a sales rep to a sales manager, to a director, to a chief sales officer, very interested in getting this deal across the line, especially at the end of the month or of a quarter or of a year, and wanting to know what can we do to make that happen, and knowing that we do have other options. And then let's get into what some of those other options are going to be. So usage alternatives, part 5 of our 6 parts on accessibility. Consider the mobile app of the vendor that you're using. Whether it's a photocopier, a tool that's going to be used in a parking garage, or a project management system, you may find that the app is super accessible. The Trello app is very accessible on an iPhone and on an Android, right? It's great to use to move cards around. Things that are challenging in a desktop environment are really easy to do on mobile. Thank you, Atlassian, by the way, for making those changes on desktop and working through a lot of those issues that we've experienced with Jira, with Confluence, with Trello. But at the same time, today, I need a solution today. And so I was able to more easily, using an iPad or an iPhone, keep up with Jira tickets, keep up with Trello cards that I could do on a mobile app. Okay, that's fine. And again, that affects maybe some pricing conversations because I'm not able to use it in the same way as everyone else. But if we can find a secure way to make it so that I can get my job done just as easily, well, then that's fine by me. You might think about the API, the back-end interface of the tool. Can I use this tool to do a lot of the data storage for me, kind of come up with a lot of the data architecture, which I love to geek out about, but I recognize not everyone does, and access it that way. So maybe, and this is something, iOS shortcuts, that app built onto your phone and into your iPad and now into your Mac, gives you a lot of opportunity. You can do things like at 7 p.m. every day, turn on my lights. This app will do things like every time I try to open Outlook while I'm on vacation, just open Audible right on top of it. You can force yourself to make sure you're on vacation. You can also, in this app, do things that talk to an API. So it's a little geeky, sure, but what it allows me to do in my organization when I was there was to say, I don't have access to a development server. I probably am more dangerous with development than I think I am, and I think I'm pretty dangerous. But through this app, I could say, hey, here is Harvest, right? A time tracking tool. Here's the address I need to hit. The documentation says, send it these parameters. I could then create projects very quickly, faster than some of my colleagues doing it with their mice and their trackpads, but I could also do it accessibly. And so for me, a few hours of setting these up, and of course it's me and I'm a geek, and so I went to town and had dozens of these by the time I left earlier this year. But the idea being that you can create these API calls as a user and make this work for you. You might even be able to do it with email responses and updates. So maybe the software is going to email you whenever somebody takes an action. Maybe it's going to allow you then to respond to that, to add comments. And those are the kinds of things that you can do to make that more accessible, excuse me, and to make sure that your team can use that tool. It might even be something that with Zapier or Integromat or Microsoft Flow, forgive me one sec, let me try and get rid of this frog in my throat.
Corbb, while you're doing that, we did have a question just come through. Maybe you can answer after you had a chance to clear your throat. Questions I didn't know that we just talked about regarding mobile app accessibility with Trello. It seems difficult to get this type of information from these big companies. How do we find this information out? So there's a question.
How do we find this out? A lot of it is just two things, right? I go back to first asking the community, right? Hey, has anybody found some great alternatives? The second is to just download these apps. Almost all of these software as a service tools are going to have some kind of mobile experience. It might even be just a mobile website experience. Give it a go and see what you find, and see how easy is it for you or for your teams to use. As somebody who maybe isn't using assistive technology on a daily basis, but is in charge of these procurement decisions, for you, that's the best thing that you can do is go find humans with disabilities and say, how could we make this work better for you? So I mentioned here Zapier, Integromat, Microsoft Flow. These are if this, then that kind of tools. There's literally a tool called if this, then that, that says anytime I move, let's say a Trello card, create a new project for me in my time tracking tool. Anytime a project is marked complete, send this email. Anytime somebody takes this action, do this. You can stack these on top of each other considerably. I had a buddy of mine who created an entire one where you slacked an ID number to a channel, and Zapier was watching that channel, and it looked through 5 or 6 different databases and 2 or 3 different apps, and it set back a unified report about whatever that ID number associated to. There's benefits of these tools from an accessibility perspective. Slack has made some major accessibility changes to their desktop app recently. They did it, by the way, with folks with disabilities on a beta program that they announced by combing their support queue for people who asked accessibility questions. What a brilliant way to get this done, to try out a lot of things and ask people's feedback. But Zapier, Integromat, Microsoft Flow make that pretty straightforward to do. It's drag and drop. They themselves, Zapier and Integromat, aren't the most accessible tools, but one of those, build it once and let it run in the background for a while. The sixth idea here is to do it yourself, right? So it might even be as simple as, you know what, it would be great if we had a tool that did all of these things. But, right now, what works well is Microsoft Excel. I can have a workbook that's got more formulas than I ever thought possible that all, reference data together, and I can copy and paste from it as I need to. It's just data. It's easy to use. It's a little bit more cumbersome than a beautiful website or project management interface. But while these apps are making the accessibility changes that they claim to be making, maybe in the meantime, we use Microsoft Excel. And that's our willingness to walk away from some of these, is we say, you know what? All right, that's not an accessible solution. I have employees with disabilities. I have future employees with disabilities who want to use these tools. Come back to me when they're accessible, right? And again, that willingness to walk away is going to inspire change and give you something in the meantime. Maybe you work for a company that has developers and you say, hey, I have this need. Could you build me a little web app? Could we do these things? Can you build me a database? Here is what I need it to do. And maybe that's where, kind of on a fancier level, we say, we're going to use, such and such tool on the backside to do all of our time tracking data, but we're going to build our own system on the front to make it fully accessible. And it's just going to talk to all the APIs of the tool we've purchased. And that's how our team's going to use it. And then, of course, there's to hire a contract for your specific needs. Nobody wants to be in the business of building their own web apps when they're trying to sell a totally different service. But at the same time, we need to get work done. And we do all kinds of things that don't make a lot of sense. We have somebody at our front desk, for example, who maybe puts together, booklets and binds things together and puts together binders and prints out documents. And wouldn't it be great if we had a system or a process or a tool that did that? Yeah. But in the meantime, we've got work to do, and well, that person's available, and well, that's sure a pretty nice solution to have right in your office. Same thing with your software. It's thinking about it in a new way. Okay, maybe we're not going to spend, $30,000 a year for the next 3 years, but we're going to spend $75,000 this year to get this project created. Well, we've saved $15,000 over 3 years. We've got a solution that's going to work really well for us, and it needs some maintenance, but maybe it's something that eventually will pay for itself. So here's the last piece that I want to address, and that's about process. This is where that procure access comes in from disability in. When we think we want to go bigger, we say, okay, great. I, as an individual contributor, can make a lot of changes. Wouldn't it be great if our organization as a whole made these changes? I've seen companies start with one question on their procurement forms. Who reviewed the VPAT, the voluntary product accessibility template, and investigated any exceptions? Just a name that somebody has to put on that form. Somebody who's going to take accountability to say, I did it. And that may have a different level of review than you and I would give to that product. But at the same time, it's going to allow us to have somebody as a point of contact, and it's going to raise the flag. I used to work with Abby Lasordo. She talked about raising her accessibility flag, waving her accessibility flag. This is a great way to do it in the procurement process. You might assign an accessibility subject matter expert to review new software and hardware early in the process. One of the first steps might be go talk to, fill in the blank with a name, about what you need. That person can go out and at least start asking some questions, at least be aware and say, oh, you want to get a product that will do this. Let's make sure that we don't, for example, just communicate our project statuses by color. We've made an impact, small one, but as an impact in that team's purchasing. And then, of course, Adrian Rosselli is the one who inspired me on this. Add a checklist and a sign-off. It's not about punishment. It's about making sure that our processes continue to improve. And the way Adrian talks about it is, if you find a color contrast error on a website in production, you can go back through a checklist and say, okay, how did that happen? We could say, well, someone agreed that they did all this color contrast analysis at the design stage. How did it get through development and testing? Oh, it was changed at the last minute. Okay, well, we need to add a line to the last minute checklist to check color contrast. Or maybe we have a thing that says don't change colors, but it allows us to improve our process. So those are the 6 components that we've talked about today. As you've dropped those last questions into the Q&A, we'll just briefly remember, today we talked about asking the community. We talked about VPATs, pricing. We talked about remediation. Talked about usage alternatives that might involve do it yourself. And we wrap it all together with this intentional congruence. Everything fits together in a very intentional way through process. And here is what I've been talking about and hinting at for so long, this procure access. Here are the building blocks of an accessible procurement program that Disability:IN has put together. I'm going to flash a QR code here on the screen and a bit.ly link to procure. It's start over. The link to this, apologies, is bit.ly/procure access blocks, or scan the QR code on the screen. This is the way where when we think we want to go big, we really want to think about all of the various levels of procurement in our organization. We really want to make systemic change. This is a great resource with building blocks and with a statement you can get your organization to sign on to about how we go about actually affecting that change. So that's what I have for you today. Here again, that final QR code for the slides and the link to them. And I am eager to hear your questions and to stay in touch on LinkedIn along the way.
Thanks so much, Corbb. We do have a few questions that have come in, and we'll keep an eye out for more. One question, this is back a little bit early on when you talked about some non-web software, and the question was, are there any automated tools for testing non-web software? There's a little bit extra in chat about this. The example was Microsoft Word.
Yeah, so there are some tools that I am aware that I've heard of. I believe Microsoft has was promoting one a few years ago, pre-pandemic, which feels like a lifetime ago, about kind of to look at some of those desktop apps. A lot of it is really going to come down to, using your keyboard. Can I keyboard navigate through this app? So Microsoft is as an example, right? If you think about a Microsoft Word, I can navigate a whole ton of that product using just a keyboard. I can press the Alt key to get into the ribbons. I can tab to the various things in a window. I can hit Enter or Space to expand, or right arrow to expand things in a menu. Those are the kind of things to be looking for. I think more importantly than looking for an automated tool to do that work at this point. That's where I would look anyway.
Another question was if there's any advice on how to share with leadership the losses on waiting for recommendations of lower price solutions versus the higher cost of better solutions. There's kind of
sharing with, so sharing with leaders the benefits of a higher cost solution as opposed to waiting for a lower one to come around. I think if I'm understanding that question, what comes to mind for me is that sometimes the most accessible tools are the most expensive. I think of an HR tool like, some of the big ones that are out there that aren't super accessible. And it seems like everybody loves Workday. Workday is loved by HR people, loved by people with disabilities. It's just a great tool. It's also the Cadillac of all HR software. And so one of the things that I've come up against sometimes is to say, how do we make sure that the software we're buying, that we think about, gosh, it's sure nice to have an accessible tool that works for everybody that's a little more expensive, but we're going to be able to use it with everybody, as opposed to we're going to need to add up a lot of hours of people who are going to be working to make that tool accessible or to creating accommodations. And I think accommodations, the right way to think about accommodations is to say, those come after we've done everything we can to make this experience as accessible as we can. So we, for example, in this conference have ASL interpreters, we have captions, we have links to the slide decks, we have an accessible website. we probably haven't covered everything. We've covered a lot. That's the time to think, okay, what might be an accommodation that would work well for somebody to participate fully in this conversation? Hopefully we've covered a lot of them. But I think if we were to be looking at this a different way from a procurement side, we might say, what are the things that if we don't do this, how many hours are we going to have to add up here? So if we assume the number of people with disabilities, what can we say about how many hours it will take per week for someone to use this tool? Well, let's multiply that by 2 because they're going to now do it with somebody else. Let's add in the lost productivity of the information in that tool not being up to date because a person with a disability has to wait for someone else to make those updates. And kind of think about it from the opportunity cost that may not be something we can put in dollars, but what are the other units of measure we can use? Can we do it in hours? Can we do it in team connectivity? And can we tie them back to the original purchase decision? The reason, remember, we're buying this tool, senior leader, is so that everybody has access to this data that's real time. But the data can't be real time because we have team members who can't use this tool. So we're literally buying something that is not solving our end problem that we are trying to, this tool is hoping to solve. So on the other hand, here is a tool that meets those needs, meets the needs of our employees, and is not going to have this extra hourly cost or extra hourly time of others in the organization.
We did have another question. Can you put that link in chat, please? I have been trying to keep up with a few links. I will. Let me throw the link for slides in it as well. Corbb, I did share your LinkedIn,
Yep.
And then
here's the
building blocks of accessible procurement. I did try to throw that one in as well.
Yep.
If anybody would like anything else, any missed links. Let me see. I do believe I also did put in at the beginning the access statement, the procure access statement as well that you mentioned. Excellent link. Yep. And so I did throw that in as well. If there's any others, please feel free to ask that in Q&A or throw that one in chat. We'll make sure to get any of the other links that you need. We do have another couple questions that came through. Any thoughts on procurement contracts where the vendor agrees to a 50% financial obligation in the case of a lawsuit?
I think, and I think it was Sherry who said this yesterday, you don't want to be in the position of, I think in her explanation, it was about countersuits, which is pretty similar, right? To say, oh, if I put out something that I get sued for, but my vendor's the one responsible, then I have a valid counterclaim against my vendor because they should have made it accessible in the first place. I think the age-old expression of when you're explaining, you're losing. So the better thing I think that I would be asking that vendor for is what is the, you have an uptime guarantee. My product is going to be uptime 99.9 or 99.8% of the time. You're going to be able to use it. In the case of an outage, we're going to send you an email every hour until it's resolved. What about the case of a known accessibility issue? What is your response time? What's your time to first response on that? What's your time to when you can get me a timeline of when it will be addressed? Or what more information that you need to understand the problem? What can we do about publicizing publicly the known accessibility blockers of your product? And that, I think, is a helpful one that helps everybody, because then the vendor can show we're making progress. People with disabilities can look at that list and say, oh, they're already aware of this. Let me upvote, and say +1, that's affecting me, and get it more attention. And we know that the vendor is now taking stock of what's inaccessible about their product. I would, and maybe it's about the initial prorate or the initial accessibility incentives to making that progress. Those are the things I'd ask for first before I would be thinking about any kind of monetary compensation if we were to be in a place where we might get sued for this. Remember, us folks with disabilities don't want to be in the lawsuit business. We want to be in business doing work. And so we're more likely to raise a kind question and ask for attention and ask for something to be addressed before we're going to jump to lawsuits. We don't want to be well down the road to a lawsuit before we're starting to really think about these things.
I think we got time for one last question. Any advice on how to approach an enterprise procurement strategy with multiple agencies? And the example given was state government.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think that what a lot of times with state government and government in particular is that committees can really, as much, you know, scrutiny and rap as they get for what they do and how they work, committees get a lot of people's attention, and they bring people together who are all working toward the same goal. I think the power that a lot of these that a lot of policies and procedures and real change starts with finding empathy and feeling and building that empathy. And what a committee can do is bring together all these folks who, man, I've been hitting my head against a brick wall for 5 years about this in my small corner of the government. I've been doing the same over here. Now we can come together and say, okay, what has been your experience working with this part, doing this, working? I can bring together this network of lunch colleagues, right? Folks I would want to go to lunch with, and we can bring our data together. We can publicize a report or bring together minds for a meeting and a lunch and learn. And that is going to start to build the empathy. Once we have the empathy, then a lot of the other pieces naturally fall right into place. I go back to, you know, Laney's quote of making sure that, if I can find it, that, you know, we just don't buy and sell tech that people with disabilities can't use. And that's something that, you know, starts and really ends with empathy.